Do you mind if I have my little space heater now?
No, I understand that you're a cold human.
I am so cold all the time.
In your defense, this office is like 105 years old, and there's giant windows behind you. So there's a reason that there is heaters in every office here at East Liberty.
We've got a lot of cold ladies in this team.
We do. The things that you have to purchase as a business owner when you start to hire
Careful
females.
now. Careful. I can say it.
It's the heaters and it's the food pun signs.
And cute little fuzzy blankets.
Yeah, I'm sorry for what I said when I was hungry. It's those things. It's very fun because I've now gotten to cross-reference because we've hired a couple guys this year.
Oh yeah?
Right?
What's their decor?
We now have 4 dietitians, which
wow.
I didn't even know there were 4 in the US, let alone in Pittsburgh. But yeah, they have very basic guy taste. You know, they want a keyboard and a nice like mount for their wrist for their mouse. They're not interested in Kirkland shopping sprees. So.
You just bought me some new art for my office last week. Did you even know that?
I did not know that, but I'm not surprised. That sounds like something that I would do. You're welcome.
Pictures of fruit. I'm not a food pun girly, but it is like little fruit baskets and it's all written in French. It's kind of like an ode to me, you know?
There you go. Yes, I love that. That's what's fun. I actually really enjoy the fact that all the offices, all the dietitians get to make their office feel like theirs. It's kind of a cute little thing. And it also just shows how bad I am at like the decor thing, which makes me laugh. You start to realize early on what you should be focusing on.
Yeah, it's not going to be your forte. That's okay.
There are things, I remember it was actually when we redid the plum office that it became really obvious because our admin team did it. Mm-hmm. And I walked in and was like, oh, this is way nicer than anything I ever would have thought of. And it's like, yeah, that's not like what my brain does at all. Like I'm not the guy for that. So
to be fair, Jesse, our newest dietitian at Robinson, he decorated the office that I used to occupy way more nicely than I ever could have. So
I bet.
Some of you dietitians do have an eye for design.
I bet his wife was involved.
Listen.
We can ask. You and I can do an over/under, but I will put $5 on this. That Jesse's wife, who I will remain nameless because I don't know if she wants to be out here all famous, but I bet that she was involved because any of the seemingly good decor choices I have been assigned in my life are because there were women that chose not me.
We'll get back to you about that.
Let me know.
We'll get back to you.
I will tell you, Corbin, I'm pretty sure most of his decor things, I'm pretty sure his girlfriend's the one that came in on a weekend with him and helped him pick it all out.
He does have a little stock car.
Yeah, he's got cute little accents, little candles. Like, I don't know, it's fun to watch how unique people are. But that's not why we're here today.
That's not why we're here. We're here.
Season 4 finale.
Season 4 finale. We couldn't leave it without just kind of recapping.
Yeah.
And also giving some little ideas of what's to come.
Yes, news. We have exciting news to share, I suppose. So we've got
you got to listen to the end for that.
Recap. We have a couple topics we want to cover, from what I understand, and then we have some announcements to make.
I'll be our guide.
Please.
You trust me.
Guide me. I do.
Okay.
Cheers.
So let's maybe recap 2024, the podcast.
Okay.
Like, what were some of your favorite episodes so that people can go back in the archives and listen?
Yeah, so we ended up with, this would be we had 12 episodes, but then we had a bonus episode, and this would technically be episode 13.
Lucky 13.
So we'll call it 14 because of the bonus episode. So we've got 14 to choose from. If I remember correctly, we did 2 on weight loss meds. And I think part 1, I think it was early, maybe episode 2, something like that. And then I think the other one was episode 11, maybe. Somewhere around there.
You remember these
but
things.
Like it was the second one and the second to last one, I think. I think March and November, if I remember correctly. But those 2 I think are essential in our current atmosphere because we dig into the first one. We talked about all the different weight loss drugs, not just the new GLPs, but we talked about a bunch of the other ones and kind of educated people on the landscape so that they can understand what these things are doing to them, which I think is very important.
Totally.
And then the second one, I think you were the one that had this idea, and I think it was a great one, was really getting to show people what dietitians do in complement to those medications.
Yeah.
And also some serious questions as a person you should be asking yourself if you're going to go down that path. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the expectations? What's the longevity? What's the sustainability? So I think we really, that second episode, hit some things hard that you and I do in consults along with all of our other case RDs whenever we're meeting with someone who's on them.
Yeah.
So that one was those two stood out to me right out of the gates.
Those two, sorry, my phone's blowing up. Should not have it on me. It's unprofessional. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I don't have mine on me.
We'll get to that later. Yours is over there. All right, cowgirl.
Ow.
Sorry, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I'm glad.
What were we talking about? Weight loss drugs.
We were talking about the two podcast episodes.
Those I loved because I feel like the first episode was us talking about all the different ones, kind of more in like a theoretical sense, just kind of like explaining what they are. But then the second episode, and both of those episodes, I will say, because I look at the numbers, are by far the most listened to.
Yeah, by thousands of listens.
Yeah. So if you're one of those rare creatures out there who hasn't listened to them, please go back and listen because it's super insightful. Even if you're not ever considering taking them, there's probably someone in your life who is. And so it'd be informative.
Yep. Well said.
I would say. And I forgot what I was going to say after that.
That's okay.
We're doing great.
We had those two episodes.
Yeah.
And then if I'm thinking about the other episodes that existed, we did 3 Ask Andrew Anythings.
Yeah.
The first one was my life story for half of it, which was fine and fun, but also like I don't know that I think everyone needs to go back to that one. The second one we kind of refined a little bit, and we got questions from the audience. But the third one that we released on my birthday in December, that one was probably my favorite episode of the year, I think.
Yeah.
And I liked that we got questions from all sorts of people and all sorts of topics. And I loved the 3-minute timer. I thought it was such a fun addition to it. And when I listened back to it, we covered so many good topics.
Oh, yeah. We could have spent an entire episode on any one of those questions, I think. And we may.
We likely will for quite a few of those. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's one of the cool parts, too, is it really the feedback showed us that our 2025 season, we definitely want to go back to some of those big topics that we were able to. And it was funny because you could even hear as we talked about it, it was like 3-minute answer was like enough, but man, was there a lot to unpack if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So that one was, I think, my favorite episode to film because for those of you that are listening and don't know this, I did not know about the timer going in. And so that was legitimately
that was a fun little surprise from the marketing team.
Yeah, the marketing team said timer, and these were questions I didn't know ahead of time either. And so that was legitimately like unscripted, unrehearsed, just stream of conscious for 180 seconds. And I was pretty close. I was plus or minus 10 seconds pretty much every time.
You came in right under the wire for so many of
every
those.
Single time.
I don't know how, like if you had a timer that you were looking at, but you did
internal
pretty good.
Clock, that little tick-tock in the back of my head. But that one was one of my favorites. I think we covered a lot of topics, and I like the cadence of it. I like that idea of covering a lot of different things. And so I think that one was my favorite one. And then what else did we do? We interviewed Vitract.
Yep, our gut testing company.
Yeah.
And that was just like also one of our big highlights for 2024 is that we started offering gut testing, which is something that I think was a big need.
Huge.
And
the amount of people that have benefited from it already, the amount of people we're ordering it for, it's such a unique test. And for those listening, Vitract is a new company that offers a microbiome test that basically works as a result of them sequencing the microbiome genome. And they're able to identify all the different 500 bacteria that are supposed to exist in your gut ecosystem and the concentrations of each and the metabolites from each. And it's able to really show us how your system is working at a zoom out glance. And we have been able to identify microbiome imbalances, really get a lot of clarity for clientele. And so we did a podcast with them where we interviewed the CEO and CMO. Or CSO. He's the scientific officer, not the medical officer. And then we've done trainings with them, and we actually got to spend some time with them in December, which was wonderful.
Yeah. Shout out to Chidozi and Linta and Akanksha. They're amazing to work with at Vitract and so intelligent. I love so much about what they do. I love that they work mainly through practitioners because patients who are taking these tests deserve to have a knowledgeable practitioner to kind of disseminate that knowledge for them and give them some practical applications. So I love so much about what they do. There's so many gut tests out there. It can be overwhelming, but theirs is gold standard as far as I'm concerned. So that was
exceptional,
exciting.
actionable. Because, like you said, there's a lot of gut tests that they're crazy expensive, and they send you a bunch of info that doesn't feel like actionable in any way.
Yeah.
Theirs is really it's actionable. It's great for us as practitioners to be able to mediate and support and supply extra info on. But so that episode was a really good one. We did some. We did an episode on like trackers and devices.
Oh yeah,
and
I
all
love that one. We did we talked about Whoop, we talked about Aura, we talked about
like
CGMs.
Fitbit and CGMs.
Yep.
Like we covered a variety of the trackers. So that was fun just to kind of, as that world continues to evolve, kind of highlight where are we at with it? Is it sensitive enough and specific enough to actually give you intel? Do you understand the baselines enough to actually like read it correctly? Or are you, unfortunately, like many, getting data that you don't truly understand and then setting random rules and guidelines based on the data, which is not rooted in health, and then creating a disordered relationship with food?
Not pointing any fingers.
Yeah, that's never happened. Not once, not now, not never. But to help people understand them better so that they could play forward.
Yeah.
So that one was a good episode. I loved Would Devon Do It?
Oh, thank you.
That one was a fun one.
That was your idea. That was your idea. And it was fun because I feel like all of my answers were like, you were asking me like, would Devon do it? But I'm still always so conscious of like, just don't do what I'm doing just because I'm doing it.
Yep.
So like you asked about like vegetarianism and things like that. So I got to dive into my reasons for that. What else did we talk about?
That one was a fun one.
About like maybe detoxes and things like that. So that was fun.
It was fun trying to trigger you and get you all worked up. We got you going. You
have such trying not to offend anybody sometimes.
You're so passionate. So it was fun to try and stoke that fire. But yeah, I'm trying to think, what episodes, any others stand out to you?
I'll share some of my favorites.
Please, yeah.
One of them was definitely the bonus episode that we did with our bestie, Dr. Emily Scott, on the menopause masterclass. That was so fun. So that was just like a free event that we decided to do spur of the moment. Of course, we recorded it and then published it. And that was super, super fun because there's so many questions about menopause. And we have our dietitian knowledge, right? The diet and lifestyle side of things, but to bring in someone like Dr. Scott, who's deeply studied all of this and works with patients every day, she was just the bomb. I was so happy to have her.
A perfect example of a true women's health expert, and is not only on the front lines, but on the cutting edge of what that means, and is advocating for women's health in ways that have not existed over the last, 100 years, if we're being honest. But to say she's doing some really cool things, and it's neat to see. Even in the episode, you can kind of hear it because she talks most for the first half, and then I kind of come in on the nutrition side. And there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of support, but man, is that a big topic. And so that one was really, it was a good turnout. We had a lot of people in the actual event, and then to drop it as an extra episode was kind of a fun addition.
These are really two episodes, but they're related, was the fertility episode for expecting parents. And then there was the pregnancy episode.
Yeah.
So I really love that we also talked about like men's fertility health.
Exactly.
And then we also talked about how men can support women during pregnancy. And we had Laura and Erin, two of our dietitians who are also moms.
Yep.
That was
moms.
Really new.
They both had younger than year-old boys when we filmed those. And so they were still in the breastfeeding stage for the most part. And so that was really fun.
So fun too, because I just love their calm demeanor. Like, I feel like, especially when it comes to the baby making years, there's so much anxiety about getting everything's perfect and right. And they are just like, okay, let's bring it down a notch. Let's just relax. Like, their calm energy was really reassuring.
Yeah, it's that reassuring, and which, to your point, especially with all the info out there and all the reels and all the TikToks, like, you can start to, major and minor things, get overwhelmed by the minutia and following the 1%, and have so much anxiety about micromanaging something that doesn't matter. And we understand that you care and you want to make the best scenario. And sometimes our role is to actually help you like declutter. And I think they both had very good voices about that, reassuring as dietitians and moms. I also enjoyed that episode because the four of us are such a cool sampling of case-specific dietitians. We're like, what, 20, I think we're 26 dietitians deep now, as a side note, which saying that makes me feel like that's crazy. That's so cool, right?
That is so
but
cool.
The four of us are all very knowledgeable, very experienced, have a very similar knowledge base, and work with very similar clienteles, but we have such different personalities. And it was very apparent in the episode. Like, the four of us, we all get along so well and we all talk so well, but like, we definitely have sort of what I call a different professional voice. And it's so neat because you have different people that are able to meet people where they are and give extremely important information.
I loved like Laura's main takeaway that I can recall was like, hey, before you start worrying about making sure you have the exact right amounts of all the different micronutrients, how about we just start taking a prenatal? Probably any prenatal is fine, for starters at least.
Yep.
And then just eat 3 meals and a snack or two, and you're like, balancing out those meals, you're probably fine.
Yeah.
You probably got like 90% of the way there.
Exactly.
Don't major in the minors, like you said.
Let's look for those small things that give you a disproportionate ROI, especially because most people aren't doing them.
Exactly.
A perfect example, it's one of the things that's really stood out to me over the last couple months as we've been seeing all of these, what I'll say is as we've been watching a increase in the diversity of opinions about food and health and all of that, which is important because there's been a lot of like a suppression of nutrition research and nutrition hypotheses is what I'll say. Like some of these more like extreme takes on nutrition that are coming out right now seem like really scary. It's like they're supposed to be a part of the overarching conversation. Whether we actually move forward with them or not is another conversation altogether. But like there's been almost like this, like we've been kind of like gaslit by the food industry for 50 years that like everything's fine. Like we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. And it's like clearly not. But also, does that mean that everybody needs to like own their own farm? Also, probably not, right? So like, there's got to be a middle. And
there is a middle ground. We need, people on opposite ends of the extreme
to drive conversations. And that's that idea of you have this hypothesis of food industry, and we have a Rottweiler come to say hi. Hi, big dog. Apollo's been not feeling too good today, so I'm excited to see him coming and hanging out. Oh man,
it's snuggle time.
Exactly.
Good to see you.
But yeah, so we have this hypothesis in the food industry, and then we have this antithesis of sort of what we'll call like the anti-food industry, if you will. And that spectrum is really important if we're going to drive forward meaningful conversations and come to conclusions, create that synthesis. And one of the ones that's driven me a little bit crazy is the recent like obsession with glyphosate, which is, Roundup. And it's what I'll note is like Callie and Casey Means did a great job with their book, Good Energy. They've raised some incredible awareness about some of the inequities and some of the like big red flags that are in our food industry. And again, I'm excited about all that. But then there's pieces of it like that where, they basically make it out, and a lot of people interpret it this way. So this is me kind of recapping what clients have come to me with. It basically makes them feel like if they're not eating organic vegetables, they're poisoning themselves. And when you zoom out and realize that the average American consumes 1 serving of vegetables per week, that's the average right now. And so are we really talking about...
in the dietitian heart.
Yeah. So like, are we really talking about trying to give people the advice of organic only? And more importantly, like how is the glyphosate the cause if 200 million Americans aren't even eating them in the first place? And like, could it be the glyphosate that's in the wheat and the soybean and all of that? Sure. Like I'm not immune to those conversations, but that's my comment there is like, we need to make sure we're having the right takeaways. And that is, there's so much out there now that can be misconstrued. And so you get somebody that plugs into some like very cutting edge information from people like that, who I am so happy they exist, and I'm so excited that they exist on our spectrum. But then people take away the wrong message, and now all of a sudden they stop eating vegetables because vegetables are killing them. And it's like, well, I hate to tell you, thought experiment. Everybody in America starts eating a serving of vegetables a day tomorrow. What happens to our health in 6 months? Does it get better or worse? And it's like, clearly better. So what are we actually talking about? That's that majoring in minor things. That's what happens is you have all these people that have not been eating vegetables that are now avoiding glyphosate instead of using a fork when they eat. Like we're not there yet. And yes, there are groups and segments of people that are definitely ready to have the conversation about the minutia. But man, I always call it the pie chart of pain when it comes to nutrition. That's that 1% level of detail when you've done the other 99, not when you're trying to fill out the pie to begin with, because the first couple things you do, quality habits, quality patterns, quality balance and pairings, that's going to be like 80 to 90% of the results.
You're going to get diminishing returns by implementing some of that minutia, but it's not to say that we shouldn't be thinking about some of these things and researching these things and advocating for changes to ingredients in our food supply.
That's well said. And that's the main takeaway. It's funny. That's the intention behind what this current movement is doing. It's trying to raise awareness to stuff that has been objectively quieted for a long time.
Overlooked big time.
Yeah. And like, hidden, like intentionally hidden. And so I'm all for the information coming out. I just hope that they do a good job of bringing on mediators and empowering people like us that understand what they're talking about to help disseminate it to people more accurately, so that people aren't on these wild goose chases trying to chase interventions that mean nothing to them.
Yep. It really ties back to that like values-based goal setting. I'd love to talk about like habits and goals in a second, but when I'm trying to get a client to kind of identify what changes they want to make in their diet and lifestyle, there's some prioritization that needs to happen according to your values and, you know, actual risks that maybe are presented, like potential chronic disease. And then there's that practical application piece. So, okay, you know, here are the priorities and like which one can we attack first? Glyphosate's probably not the first one. Probably not.
Exactly. That's probably not number one. And that's, I always call it in the pie chart of pain.
Yeah.
That's not the thing to start with. There are so many other things to start with. I would much rather see someone start eating a ton of fruits and vegetables, regardless of sourcing.
Yeah.
And that's going to cause a net benefit to our health. And like I said, there's a whole, we could, and we probably will this upcoming season, really dig into this more. But I wanted to pull that into today's topic because that's been constant and present over these last couple of months. And there's mostly, it's a lot of fear. It's like, wait, we're talking about things like raw milk and we're talking about all this stuff. It's like, well, we kind of need to talk about it. And the comment I always say is, you can't have your synthesis, which is your correct answer, without first having your hypothesis and your antithesis. And so you need to establish the spectrum of opinion and spectrum of knowledge. It needs to be discussed. And so right now we're seeing a lot of antithetical theories coming up, and it feels it's creating a massive visceral reaction, right? It's this oppositional feeling. And it's like, we're not going to end up way over there on the complete opposite side. We're going to use that to drive conversation, drive research, and then come to more accurate conclusions, because our current ones are clearly incomplete. And so I hope that we can continue to advocate for open communication and really like stick to the discussions about research. And like I said, I think a big piece of that is making sure that we're louder than ever. Because we are the synthesis they're trying to get to, we've been preaching for over a decade.
Good. It's true. It's true. One of a good friend of mine who I was on his podcast recently, the Better Than Average podcast, his name's Will Marshall. He said he's a strength coach. He said everything's a conspiracy if you don't know how things work. And I'm like, wow, that's so true, because when you hear a lot of the scientific jargon coming out, especially when it comes to nutrition, it can really elicit that feeling of fear. Especially when you don't know what to do about it, right?
Well, like, oh my gosh, fear comes from uncertainty.
There's toxic ingredients and everything. What am I supposed to do? And you end up like wanting to eat nothing at that point. So I really love what we're able to do in terms of educating without fear mongering. I think is really key. You know, there's no sell here other than we just want to help people with their nutrition. You know, we're not pushing any certain programs or supplements necessarily. We just like are literally advocating for the person and wanting them to be better educated. And that's what this podcast is all about, which I'm excited. We're going to keep diving into it in 2025. I
love it. It's interesting. We're at a phase now where, because of the internet and access to information, there's a lot of the idea that we like know just enough to be dangerous, right? Is a way to think about it. So there's a lot of people that like start to get into a topic and their confidence about their knowledge of said topic is disproportionate to their actual knowledge. So then they start to disseminate information out there that is skewed, inaccurate, and ill-informed. And our role is to be the actual experts that can truly surround the topic. And that's, if you have someone who's coming at it from one lens and they have like a hard stance, that oftentimes shows lack of understanding. Either that or some extremely biasing experience. Right? Something happened in their personal life that like led them to believe that unequivocally, or they've been short-sighted in their analysis. And so being able to analyze it completely is a sign of mastery. And when you get into a point where you understand something to the point of mastery, you're typically going to have a more moderate stance about it. And so I think in this world where there's all these extreme claims and all these extreme opinions coming out, to your point, our role is to help educate and help people better understand, so that we can kind of like find that middle and realize that it doesn't have to be this like crazy fear-mongered scenario.
Absolutely. Black and white feels so much more comfortable than embracing the gray. And and I don't shame anyone who is going out there and learning about nutrition and and maybe kind of getting some misinformed interpretations.
Yeah,
just
it's hard
because,
not to. How
yeah,
how are you? I mean, how
yeah.
else you're going to go out there and you're going to get exposed to stuff? How are you going to
Yeah.
know?
And I love when clients like are out there absorbing nutrition information. Like I have prescribed books like that to
Yeah.
my clients because I'm like, I want you to devour this and I want you to bring it to me and ask all the questions you can, and let's tear it apart together and let's get to the root of like what about this book makes sense for you. How can we apply that?
I've done that too, and I'll say I want you to collect this perspective.
Yeah.
And that's the thought behind it.
I
I've had
love that.
clients read intuitive eating books and then read like Rob Wolf's Wired to Eat as an example, which are like objectively valuable resources that have a ton of great information, but land very differently for different people. And there's some people that I wouldn't encourage them to read both. I'd encourage one or the other depending on like where their deficit is or where their biggest ROI is. But then to your point, there's some people that are like ready for a more complete analysis and full-blown understanding of it. And it's fun to be the Sherpa that helps kind of walk them up that mountain.
Yeah.
And help gain that understanding through our knowledge and then also through the resources that we have access to. I'm actually very excited overall about like all the stir up of all these conversations, because I do think that in many ways it's overdue. I just hope that what we tend to do as a society, unfortunately, is we go from one extreme and then we have to touch the other one before we realize that the middle was right. Like it's that idea of like, sometimes you have to go from, you have to go from a standard American diet and go keto before you realize blueberries and sweet potatoes weren't the problem. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of our tendency.
Yeah.
And so my concern is that we're going to, and there, it's to say how we go about these next few years is going to be telling. Are we going to talk about the other side of the spectrum and then arrive at the middle? Or are we going to like rush to the other side of this spectrum, enact policy based on that extreme, and then have to redo it again in 5 to 10 years? And that's why I said, our voices are more important than ever, because I totally agree that things need to change. But I also, after 11 years and seeing 15,000+ patients, and that doesn't include how many patients our team has seen, I have a very good view of like where this needs to land. And so please, like you movers and shakers out there that are excited to stir stuff up, make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that have a genuine, robust understanding and didn't just like fall down one rabbit hole of obsession. And I will say that's something that's more common in physicians than a lot of the other medical professionals. It's funny, they're evidence-based and research-based, but what can sometimes happen is there's like a proximity bias to that, where they become so embedded in a research that then they believe like that research is more applicable to populations than it is. And you'll see them like kind of like what I like to call like live in the lab. Like they'll live in the lab of that research, and they don't think about the application, the environmental effects, the social, psychological, behavioral, cultural. It's just input output down here at this like lowest possible level. And that's why you start to notice a lot of the doctors that get famous for nutrition, they're doing different things 5 years later.
Yeah.
And it's
like
not
Peter Attia.
Yeah, it's his book
He's
Outlive,
a great example.
right? In his foreword, he says, consider this my penance for keto.
Yeah.
Because he was the keto guy 10 years ago. And to be fair, all the ketogenic resource that I developed and knowledge I developed was rooted in his research. And that's where keto isn't a bad thing. There's immense value in it as a potential, but it's not a starting point for most people. And he was doing it for his own personal reasons, went down the rabbit hole with it, like swore to it, and then opened a practice to try a lifestyle medicine practice, try and help people. And then after seeing 10,000 patients, realized that it wasn't practical, and it also didn't have positive outcomes in a lot of people. So like not guaranteed to be a good thing, and also unsustainable. And so 10 years later, he apologizes and goes, I understand the merit in what it is, but I also understand that it may not be. And what you can hear is that's a dude that went to an extreme and then slowly but surely had to learn moderation. And it made me smile because when I read his book Outlive, him and I have an exceedingly similar view on nutrition and habits and wellness and health. It's like, oh, I wonder how you got there. And it's through experience, through genuine knowledge. We have such robust knowledge. Exactly. It wasn't a weekend seminar. It wasn't a study that we read cover to cover.
It's like our 10,000 hours.
Yeah, and then some.
On that note, is there anyone that you like outside of this podcast, anyone that you would recommend as a good resource for some of the stuff we're talking about? Like anyone who you really like or follow or?
Yeah, I think right now the big ones, I think Lane Norton is a very important perspective to collect. He's definitely, I've always referred to him as my virtual big brother. Like I've never met the dude. He seems awesome. I'd love to have a meal with him. But he's exceedingly knowledgeable and he's very centered in his views. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. I think he's done a great job of communicating science in a manageable and digestible way. So I think he's definitely a person that should be in your, on your round table of wellness. I think Peter Attia is absolutely one of them. I think his knowledge, his resources, his understanding, his ventures, like he's done so much. And that book, Outlive, is one of the few books I do think that anybody that's interested in longevity and wellness should read. Like it's a lot, but it is a phenomenal book. And he put 7 years of his life into it and it shows. And so I think he's definitely a big one. I do, to your point, think that the Good Energy by Callie and Casey Means, I think there's a lot of value in that perspective. My comment being that is one that I think we're going to watch that information evolve over the coming years. And so I think some of it is exceedingly insightful. And I think some of it is compensatory. I think it's an overcompensation for where we're at. And that's where I start to see the pendulum of like, yes, we're way over here and we've got work to do, but that doesn't come by going way over here. And that's how I've felt about a variety of communities, right? Even as we look at how we intervene with clients as dietitians, like I've always struggled to like declare a stance on nutrition intervention because it's rare that like one far hardcore opinion lands for 100% of people.
And it's widely applicable.
And while I'm all for dietitians developing expertise and then focusing on those populations, like please, absolutely. I personally struggle not to be the center trying to zoom out and see the big picture, but start to realize like that's just one of my strengths and skill sets. And so I need to like lean into what I'm good at. And that's what Case Specific has been built on. So it's, it's those pieces, but those would be the three that like really pop in my head. And that's part of one of the hard things. And I'm curious if you have any others that pop in your mind, because I think it's really hard to put really good nutrition content out. And it's because good nutrition content isn't extremes. Actually, James DiNicolantonio is another one that comes to my mind. He's a really good example. Ben Carpenter, now that you say it on Instagram, I love Ben Carpenter. He's phenomenal.
And his wife, Sohi Fit.
Sohi Fit,
she's awesome. I'm always a big fan of people who are good practical applicators and just make it very real world.
These are all moderators of information.
Jordan Syatt, I love.
Oh, he's fantastic. The fitness,
and then this is more of like a book that I really enjoyed by Dr. Benjamin Bickman, Why We Get Sick. Have you read it?
Oh, it's a great book.
That's a great one. I've recommended it to a lot of my clients who are newly diagnosed diabetic or pre-diabetic. Really help them kind of understand how glucose moves through the body and can impact tissues. So that was a really good one. And again, I feel like if you tried to take every single last recommendation away, you may drive yourself crazy. So choosing like one or two things that you can really focus on from that was like a good route. And sorry, I have to say one thing about Peter Attia and Outlive. Full disclosure, when I got to the nutrition episode, I was ready, chapter, I've been listening to too many podcasts. I was ready to rip it apart because I had loved everything I read up until that point. And I'm like, here we go. He's going to let me down in this nutrition chapter. And he killed it. He did such a great job. And I was really like just blown away at how articulate he was at just expressing that people just need different things. There's no one diet or approach that's going to work. There are definitely like certain
specific nutrition, baby.
But there are like key tenets like, movement and increasing produce and like things that are like very widely applicable, but like no one specific intervention that's like everyone should be doing this exact thing.
The vague what is very simple. How to intervene to make that what happen is the how, and that's what we do. And when you're someone like him who's been in practice for a decade, he very quickly sees that like one templated concept is going to fall short for 97% of people. Like it just isn't.
I wish it was that easy.
I know. I agree.
Well, we probably wouldn't have jobs. But
the other podcast that popped in my head as we were talking, and these are the ones that I think it goes back to, what are you trying to get out of the info? So it doesn't mean everyone should listen to them all the time, but I think if you're looking for like really cutting edge, Andrew Huberman definitely does great stuff. And I will say a lot of that stuff it's in the phase of research where they're seeing the short-term benefit and then they're extrapolating it. So is it actually valuable or not? Question mark. But it's a really good perspective to collect, and he does bring a lot of very unique scientific things up. It's definitely a great place to discuss. They do have a tendency to talk about the 5%. So they talk about the minor things, right? And that's where I don't think that's a problem, but it just goes back to, if the first intervention in your life and health is your sauna or your cold plunge, we're missing the point.
Yeah.
Like, if we're not moving well and eating well and sleeping well before we're sauna and cold plunging, we're not actually really maximizing anything.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's an example where, like, he digs into like hormesis and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. People that are probably nailing the 80 to 90%
that are doing
things.
The major things already. They're hitting the fundamentals well. So I don't know that he's what I'd call like a fundamentalist podcast, but I do think that the content's real and it's valuable and it's interesting. And then David Sinclair, who, you know, his podcast is Lifespan, and his work on hormesis at the Harvard Research Lab is just top tier. I mean, it's so cool. And so the cutting edge nutrition stuff definitely is coming out of groups like that. And then, you know, you start to see some of what I'd call the more community and policy-based nutrition from Callie and Casey Means conversation. And then I think you have, you know, when you look at Lane Norton and when you look at Peter Attia, I think you have professionals that have been patient-facing for a decade or more and have not just the nutritional knowledge or and I'll just call it like the lifestyle medicine knowledge, but also have the experience in troubleshooting the how, the personalization aspect, which is so vital to long-term success.
Yeah, it's like you get past people like Peter Attia is a great example of someone who's made it past that initial phase of like something worked really well for them and now they're proselytizing it.
Exactly.
It's like we've kind of moved beyond that and found out.
It's that what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
I was trying to think of that word earlier.
Dunning-Kruger effect, right? It's that idea that when you first start to learn about something, your confidence in your knowledge goes up faster than your knowledge. So you reach this tipping point where you have like a little bit of knowledge and an inordinate amount of confidence. And what's hilarious is you will rate yourself as more knowledgeable at that point than a master of the topic would. And so then your confidence as you start to learn more goes down as your knowledge goes up. And so it's this weird graph where it kind of crosses paths. And that's where that concept of we know just enough to be dangerous. We live in a world where everything's a Google search away, which gives you like a snippet insight, which makes you feel falsely empowered, and there's no depth in it. And so you're an inch deep and a mile wide. And then you have someone like us that's spent the last decade going a mile deep and an inch wide. And it's like, we might have a tip, just one or two. Hear me out.
We could call it the Delulu effect.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. The Delulu effect. That's easier than Dunning-Kruger effect.
That's what I'm going to rename it. Rebrand.
The Delulu effect. I love that so much. But yeah, that is where you can see the people like Lane Norton, the Peter Attia, they have true mastery. And what I'll note is Lane has always kind of been that way. Like even in his early bodybuilding days, he was very much like, this is the science, this is what I see. And Peter Attia was just more niche. Like he was like, this is the science, this is what I see. But also because this is what I see, he fell for wasati, which is what you see is all there is, which is a type of bias that's very common. And that's why I say doctors are very prone to that. When you think about the carnivore MD and a lot of the other people out there, that's what happened is they like see something, learn something, immerse themselves in something, live it, believe it to the fullest, and then they get some sort of platform. And then unfortunately, and it's hilarious because then like, again, 10 years later, you have a Peter Attia saying, I'm sorry, or you have the carnivore MD saying, I haven't been carnivore for 3 years because it jacked up my testosterone levels, which of course it did. It's not meant to be a long-term diet. And if you think it's a lifestyle and not a reset, you don't know enough about it, and you should talk to someone like me that knows a lot about it, right? And so, but it's interesting. So I like those people as we'll call it virtual mentors.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that was an off the record, or not off the record.
That wasn't on our to-do list tonight.
That wasn't on our agenda, but I'm glad I asked.
You had brought up, so you go just circling back. Your favorite episode you had said was the menopause masterclass. Yeah, I think we've covered most of the ones of last season. Were there any others that stood out to you that you can think of?
Those are the main ones. But next, we want to get into just kind of what to expect in the next year with the podcast and also with Case Specific. We've got so many exciting things coming up, so we want to give a little sneak peek to that.
I like it.
Before we get into that, because it is January, people are making goals. People are really excited. Reset. Some people like hate the idea of a New Year's resolution, but a lot of people are really motivated to make some positive changes right now. And we could spend a whole episode talking about this, but I really feel like a lot of this, like goal setting and resolutioning, I feel like it's been kind of beat to death. So what I want from you is, what is your favorite tip for building healthy habits, setting goals, etc.? Just give me like one, your favorite, maybe like one that you've learned more recently, because you've been in this game for a while.
Yeah, and that's, man, especially with all the books I read about this and have read over the years, like to your point, I could go tip after tip after tip after tip. I think it's important to start at the very beginning. And so, and I don't think most people know where that is. I think that to them, the beginning is the start line, which is the starting of new habits. But the beginning is typically before the new habits, it's reconciling the old habits. And so the tip I will give is, before you move forward, you first need to understand what your bad habits do for you.
Yeah, wow.
I think that we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is to say, if you're a smoker, cigarettes are doing something for you. Yes, we can sit here and say how bad they are and blah, 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 blah. Let's not talk about that right now. Let's not beat the shit out of the bad habit. Let's not, talk about the negatives. Let's talk about the positives. What is it doing for you? Is it that escape from your workday? Is it that distraction? Is it that thing that keeps your anxiety at bay? In what circumstances does it do those things for you? Like understanding what your bad habit does for you. Same thing with food. Like food itself is not the bad habit, but like in what circumstances is food used inappropriately and why? Is it that you are eating at night because you've not taken care of yourself all day? Or is it that you're eating at night because you don't have time for you and you're trying to jam in a whole bunch of happiness into an hour before bed after job and partner and kids and extracurriculars and all the different things? And so it's really important to understand what the bad habit is doing for you, because only then will you be able to hire someone to replace it.
Yep.
And that's that idea of like, if night eating is the thing you do to unwind after the kids go to sleep, like, could walking on the treadmill while you watch an episode of something eventually replace that? Possibly, but it's a little bit of a jump if your goal is relaxation. And so understanding that your bad habit is a relaxant gives you a job description of, I need to find something relaxing. And so we could sit here and say, okay, I'm going to, hit these exercises and do these things. We can get very action oriented before we really understand what those things are replacing. And because they don't replace the things, now we tend to have these good habits and these bad habits coexisting, which is too many things. And the good ones don't ever take hold because they're not attached to anything meaningful, which means the first time life gets overwhelming, they're going to disappear. And that usually takes 3 to 6 weeks, which is why next week is when people start to feel a little bumpy in their hard-nosed resets of 2025. And so
life
I think
happens, it goes right to the wayside.
And so let's understand what your bad habit does for you. Truly understand what at its core it's trying to help you with. And it's funny, it's no different than, it's the toxic ex-boyfriend, right? It's like, why do you keep going back to him? And it's like, well, clearly he does something that makes you feel loved, seen, heard, valued, or understood. So like, we need to understand that part before we can truly sever ties with it. So that'd be
that's a great one.
My big one.
What I notice with a lot of folks is that it's really painful to look at the bad habits. And because of that, like really negative self-talk to
There's a lot of shame around those habits.
Exactly. So it's so much easier to focus on what the new thing is going to be than confront that old shame. And so one thing that you taught me is like curious, not critical. So instead of looking back on our, like, let's call them bad habits because they're not serving us. Instead of looking at them and being critical, it's just like try to shift towards some honest curiosity. Like if you had a friend who had this bad habit, like you would probably have more of a curious than a critical approach. You probably wouldn't be telling them that they suck at everything because, they like to watch an episode of Game of Thrones at night.
Exactly. It's funny because you can even think about it a different way. Like if there's a leaking pipe and the first thing you do is you put duct tape on the pipe, that's not a bad first action. Now, should you then go and turn off the water and replace the pipe? Yes. But like sometimes bad habits are there in the short term to help you when you needed them the most, when something urgent was happening. And that's why these are so deeply rooted, is oftentimes these habits are rooted in some sort of escapism, avoidance, coping, or trauma from years ago, and you might not even be able to recall what started this. And so, like you said, it
plug
can be
for therapy.
Yeah, plug for therapy. But it is to say that I think that if we can help people realize that it's extremely human to look for the duct tape when there's a leak. That's not inherently bad. You're not a failure for looking for the duct taping it, and then going and thinking about other things.
Yeah.
But if you would like to now go turn off the water, replace the pipe, like, we're here to do that. But first we have to remember why the duct tape was there.
Yes,
right. And
totally.
so, like, that's kind of that thought of like, let's, and to your point, there's a process where it's like getting rid of the shame associated with being attached to bad habits. Is no different than the toxic ex-boyfriend. I know I should break up with him, but, and then it's like, well, what's the but? Let's understand that. But there can be that, like, that massive shame that's associated with those habits. And so I think it's, if you can create a safe environment as a dietitian or a health practitioner to help them understand that, like, this habit served you. And so, like, don't crap on yourself because it was contributing to you, but it was charging you interest, and now you're in debt. Yeah. And so, like, you didn't know. You put it on the credit card because it was an emergency, and then you didn't know you had to pay the credit card off. And so you got into a transaction that you didn't have full understanding of. Don't beat yourself up for what you didn't know then. Yeah. Let's understand what it was doing. Let's replace it with something that's not debt accruing, and then let's build momentum that way. And so I find that so valuable. And like you said, it can be tough, but man, is it powerful, because you're then making space in your life.
And then you get to think honestly about, what do you want to fill it with?
Yeah. You can work on being the healthier, happier you, and visualizing who is he or she, and what does she do, and how does he do things? How do they spend their time? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of power that can come from it. So if you start with let's understand what my bad habits are doing for me currently, recognize the good that they come with, and recognize we need to hold on to that good, but then find something that, instead of being a +1 -1, where it does that good thing, but then it also hurts you in some way, let's find a +1 +1, something that does that good thing, but then also does something else good. Right. And that can be really, really powerful, because now you're going from what feels good in the moment but feels bad overall, which creates a net negative over time, to something that feels good in the moment and it feels great long term, which is really empowering over time.
Yeah, it serves that, like, experiential self, and it also serves that narrative self that's like, I'm proud of how I spent the last hour.
Yep. And that's a perfect, night eating is a really big one, right? Because it tends to be exactly what we said. It's that busy schedule, the job, the kids, the extracurriculars, all the different things that are going on. And then you get home and you've got an hour before you need to go to bed, and you're trying to jam in as much you time as possible. So you turn on a television show and you scroll on your phone and you eat something. And so you have 3 different things stimulating you and making you feel good in the moment. But watching television, scrolling on your phone, and eating right before bed is going to cause you to not sleep as deeply. It's also going to throw off growth hormone, which is part of the reason you don't sleep as deeply, throw off all sorts of hormonal scenarios. It's going to affect metabolic rate. It's going to affect digestion. Now, all of a sudden, you start waking up and you're not hungry in the mornings because your stomach had food in it all night and it didn't digest it, because you don't digest very well when you're sleeping. And so you have, like, reflux, and you have a sour stomach. So now you're accidentally fasting, but it's not an intentional periodization. It's actually just a side effect of a not so great habit, which then means you start under eating all day, which means you start eating more and more and more at night. The reflux gets worse and worse and worse. The sleep gets worse and worse and worse. We can hear where, like, those aren't helping you. That thing that was trying to help you in the short term, that moment where you're scrolling and laughing at an episode rerun and chewing on the crunchy thing, that feels really good, but everything after it is not great. And it's like, okay, well, what would happen if instead, like, we went and took, like, a really relaxing shower, and then, like, laid in bed and read something, as an example. And it's like, well, in that version, you're going to sleep way deeper. You're going to wake up more rested. You're going to set up the opportunity to eat a breakfast with an actual hunger. And it's going to give you better hunger fullness cues, better flow. So we can just hear where it's like, okay, well, now that we understand what it's doing and what it was trying to do and when it existed, let's talk about things that could actually happen during that time. Yeah. Right? You going for a walk out in the neighborhood at 9:30 at night, probably not it. But you soaking in your jacuzzi tub that you don't ever get to use because who has the time? Maybe you do that. Or snuggle up with a Rottweiler. Not that I'm
Sounds like you've got a nice jacuzzi tub and a nice Rottweiler to decompress. Well, that was actually going to be one of my next questions, was like, what do you do in the evenings to unwind? Because I know you had talked about in the past, like you were a little bit of a night snacker.
Yeah, there was a period of time, and it's funny that I'll even share where it came from, right? It's like in high school, I started running cross country. Cross country practice was 5:30 to 7:30. So by the time I dropped friends off or get home, it was 8 o'clock. Shower, you're not starving after you run.
Mm-hmm.
And so like by the time I'd eat dinner, it was 9:30
Mm-hmm.
and I'd have this big dinner. And then I went to college and I worked at GNC until 7:30, like 4 or 5 nights a week. And I'd go to the gym afterwards. And so I'd get home 9, 9:30, 10. And so dinner at 10 was kind of my life from 13 to 23, like regularly.
Terrible.
And when I was 22, I started Case. And by 23, I was working until 7 most nights. And I was living up the street in Shadyside, right up the street from this first office. And so I'd be done at 7, 7:30. I'd get home and I'd eat at 8 or so. But then we moved to the suburbs. And all of a sudden it became commute home. And then I also started to work even later because I didn't have good boundaries in my early 20s and just kind of kept filling the schedule. Another combo for another day. And so there was a period in time where the cross country and then late dinner, or the lifting weights and then late dinner, became working until 9 and then driving home and then late dinner. And to your point, I was coming off the back half of a 16-hour day. I was mentally exhausted and I had to get up at 6 the next morning. And I usually had 100 emails to reply to before I went to bed at midnight. And so I was undersleeping. I wasn't protecting myself. These are those younger personal problems we come across. All of us are guilty of them. And so I definitely had a period of time where it was like dinner was late, or it would just be like I still needed to eat something at that time. And what was so funny is, to your point, I would eat that late. And then when I was about 27, man, that it stopped working. All of a sudden reflux started happening, and we kind of like worked our way into like the COVID year at that point, like as we kind of worked our way towards. And it was the COVID year that really hit me the hardest, because I was working longer hours than I ever had, trying to keep things afloat, trying to make stuff happen. And I got into this reality where I was eating like late at night, so I wasn't hungry. So then I was like, oh, I'll just fast. I'll just do like a noon and a 9. Like I'll just eat that way. But I was working out at 5:30 in the morning. And so like it was all so botched. And so I was like eating late at night, not digesting it well, waking up with reflux, not hungry. Like it started to really bust, And so the first comment I'll make is, one, let's call a spade a spade. I needed a time management overhaul.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the night eating. It was like, what is your day
Was
look
night
like?
eating the villain or the victim, right? Night eating was a side effect of my poor time management. And so I will be the first to call people out on that. But it is to say that the night eating was still meant to be an unwind at the end of an unreasonably long day while I decompressed before I faced the next big day. And so you start to go, okay, what could you do instead? And so in 2021 was when I started to like reset boundaries. And one of my first ones was like dinner between 6 and 7 regardless. And I realized what had happened is evening appointments were so desirable, right?
Yes.
And so I was selling my evenings. And so I had clients until 8, 9, almost every night, which different conversation for another day, but it's to say, so I wouldn't eat until that was done. Well, my first rule was, if you're my 6 o'clock, you're talking to me while I eat dinner. And like, if you have a problem with that, then like go somewhere. So that was the first thing like I took
Meet me
back.
Not at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, if you are worried about me chewing, I promise not to be that barbaric. But if you're really concerned about me chewing, you can kindly like see yourself off my schedule. So like that was the first like big, bold, people-pleasing boundary I took back. And
I might steal that one from you.
Yeah, it's a TFB. It's like, I am going to eat it between 6 and 7 or around that time when I'm hungry. And so that was step one, because then once dinner went from 9 p.m. to 7 p.m., now that dinner's digesting better, and now I'm not coming home hungry. Big wins. I'm also not coming home for food. I'm eating what I packed, as opposed to coming home to the fridge and the pantries and the cupboards where I'm exhausted, so my brain is looking for the most convenient thing that sounds good, which are
cereal.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. How often was it a giant bowl of cereal? More often than I care to admit. And to be fair, what did I eat for dinner in high school almost every night after cross country? a movie theater popcorn bowl size of cereal. That was the go-to. And so you can hear where there was a lot of other pieces of this puzzle, but setting the dinner at 7 was an example of it was a fundamental habit installation that once I did it, that was what James Clear would have called your pillar habit.
Yeah.
Once my 7 p.m. dinner happened, dinner by 7, that opened up my evening to be actually like wind down. That opened up my night of sleep to be deeper. That meant I woke up more rested and I woke up without a sour stomach, which made a breakfast before 9 a.m. very plausible because I had the appetite for it. It knocked a bunch of other things in rhythm, right? And so then I was able, to your point, say, okay, now I still am left with this getting home at 9 and wanting to decompress. So what am I going to do? And I shifted from come home and turn on the TV, make some food, eat, watch, and then pull up emails and do emails until I can't stand it anymore, and then pass out, to come home. And my wind down was take a shower first thing. I love single-minded showers. I take my like cleaning shower in the morning after I work out because I'm sweaty. My evening shower was not a clean me shower. It was a stand there, usually the lights in the bathroom off, like a light in the like one of my lights in like my closet or in like the little French door of the bathroom, like whatever it is, like a little light, but like low light, let the water hit my back and really like be present. And it was that like reconnecting with my body, where once I could feel the drops of water go down my chest, go down my side, and like fall off my foot, I knew I was like very present. And so I would just enjoy the water.
It's like a mindfulness moment.
And so it was come home, unpack stuff, pack stuff, go upstairs, get a shower, single-minded shower, huge for me. Jacuzzi tub, definitely an option.
Nice.
Because I definitely love to soak when I can. That's not a bad thing. And then I have a love sack in the master bedroom. And that is where the Rottweiler snuggles occurred. And so this was when this was all happening. This was back when there was Apollo and Axel. So I had both pups. And so I would sit in what I called my Rottweiler recliner, because I'd have a dog on each side in this love sack. And I started to watch an episode of something on my phone, which watching an episode on Netflix on my phone, I watch one episode and I'm done. Watching it on a TV while I'm doing emails, I could stay up till 2 a.m. that way.
Yeah.
And so getting out of the living room and getting up into the bedroom and shifting devices, you can hear there's a lot of little differences, but the difference of come home, get upstairs, take a shower, settle in the love sack, pet some dogs, watch an episode of something. I then was like getting darker and darker, lower, like, winding down. And man, did I start sleeping more deeply. And what's hilarious is, as somebody that was always like, no, I'm just a night owl. Like I was always the up till 12 or 1 and then forced myself to wake up at 6. I started getting tired at 9:30 and 10 o'clock and realized that I'm not a night owl. That was a result of me having habits that overstimulated me late at night.
Yeah.
Why was I eating at 10 o'clock at night? What was I feeding for? Like where was that energy getting put to use? And so that's how it evolved. And so for me, those types of wind downs tend to be my go-to these days. And there's different iterations of them, but it's usually some degree of like wind down, shower, soak. It's usually some Rottweiler snuggles. There may be some Theragunning. There may be some rolling of leg.
We got a Rottweiler snore.
Yeah, we got some Rottweiler snores.
I don't know if that caught on microphone.
Yeah, exactly. But so there may be some little other things. I may read instead of watch something. Occasionally, I'll let myself scroll, but I'm also like not I don't get lost in scroll. I've just like never been a huge social media person, so I'm pretty decent at like stopping.
You're one of one.
I know. That's why I said that. Is like full disclosure. I'm not someone that like 3 hours go by. I like do it for 5 minutes, then I'm like.
And then Andrew became unrelatable.
Yeah, and then he became. I will say hack. It's because I've curated my feed.
That's good.
So like my feed is an obnoxious amount of like motivational content and therapy. And so like if you ever want to go like feel good about yourself, use my feed. But it's also to say, because it's that type of content, it's like very saturable. And so I'm just like I'm very picky about what I allow on my feed. It's like dogs, certain types of things that my type of sense of humor, and then for the rest of it is like big philosophical thinking and therapy and tips and tricks and observational psychology. And you can only read so many scrolls from Adam Grant and Simon Sinek.
Like, I get it.
I get it. Exactly. And so I think that's part of it is I've curated it. So I'm very picky about what I feed my brain.
It's great.
I believe that, what we fuel ourselves with, it's not just food. Like fuel is anything we take in. And so I am very picky about what I let my brain consume.
Yeah. I could talk about my crazy social media habits another time, but I'm like militant with my social media boundaries.
Sometimes you have to be.
I'll save that for another Ask Devon anything.
Yeah. Yep. Would Devon do it? Would Devon scroll for hours on end? She would if she didn't have the following protocols.
She would if she could.
Yep. She's not allowed.
But she can't.
Use those different apps and things. What helped me, what's funny is my 20s, as we've kind of beaten to death, I definitely was dopamine seeking with work. Like I was accomplishment drive, 16, 18-hour work days, worked on the weekends. Like what I did was what mattered to me and only that. And like I had periods where it was like no fantasy football. I refuse to go on social media. I won't like watch shows. Luddite. Like I really went hard for a few years there. And I also was caffeine free. And like I was definitely like really, really rigid. And I think to a certain extent, there is some, it's funny. It's no different than, if I'm going to be related, it's no different than after doing keto and realizing that blueberries and sweet potatoes are awesome. Same thing. Like once
a little meme here and there won't hurt you.
Yeah. So it's like once I like had the deprivation and I had the dopamine from other things, I started to like replace it with little things from this other stuff. And a little bit goes a long way for me.
Yeah.
And so like a little coffee or a little caffeine, like as you know, I don't drink it every day, but like I enjoy it. And it's the same kind of thing. Like I enjoy laughing on social media, but I don't spend a ton of time on it. So I think that like abstinence, it may have been a useful precursor in my gradual moderation. I will say that isn't always the case. Sometimes abstinence breeds resentment, which then causes binging. So there's definitely some intentionality of integration. Like I couldn't have gone from the nothing to the all. I definitely had to allow some stuff in. But I think that because of my world and our expertise, I think I was able to kind of like install some things. And I'm a big fan of your stress busting team. So all these things we're talking about are stress relievers. If we're going to really like oversimplify it. And the way I like to think about it is like no basketball team wins a championship with one amazing player. And so like if you have one really good stress buster, which is like, that's what like smoking and drinking tend to be for people.
Yeah, you're going to overuse that.
You're going to overuse it and you're never going to win the championship. And so I kind of installed a lot of these habits with the idea of I'm the manager of my team. And if I do one of these things a day, I might not do it again for 30 days if I have a deep enough team. So like I find that a deeper stress busting roster is better than having like a habit that I'm increasingly attached to. So I'm a big fan of the variety, which is why, when we talk about night routines and morning routines, I definitely have morning flow and night flow, but there is variety in them and there is autonomy in them because I am not a robot. And my day that I work is very, very structured and scheduled. I'm so meeting heavy in what I do, whether it's patient facing or dietitian facing or visionary and expansion facing. All of it is meetings and delegation and all that.
You need some intentional non-doing time.
Correct. I need some open time where I have a general idea of what I'm doing, but I have like a pace that I get to set and an order of events I get to set. So there's definitely some like flexibility in it. But these are all things you can hear like, even I, as a practitioner, I was 7 years into a career helping thousands of people do this. I had to be that intentional and had to gradually iterate. This isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that definitely takes time. But first understanding what the bad habits do for you, coming full circle to your question to me, I believe helps you then better understand how to replace them and start to troubleshoot and curate them and start to build out a better stress busting team. And what's funny is that habit may still be on your roster.
Yeah, it just takes up like this much of importance compared to all the others.
Exactly. Like
it's like build all the tools in your toolbox.
Like I don't a glass of wine in the evening. Like sure, keep it on your list, but like maybe it's not your LeBron James. Like same thing.
It's not the thing you need.
It's not the thing you do every night as your number one. But like maybe you do it every once in a while. Great, that sounds fantastic. And so that's where it's funny. If you build out more things, you will naturally moderate just because of the variety. And so a lot of times if you find that you're like quote unquote addicted to something, and I'm not dismissing the addiction properties of alcoholism, that's not what I'm talking about here. But if you find that you're like perpetually and intensely doing the same habit over and over again and it's not to your benefit, one of the problems may be that you just don't have enough alternatives.
Yeah.
So you may need to go deeper. And that comes back to, I think people start with get rid of the bad habit, beat themselves up for having it, and replace it without interviewing the candidate for like proximity. And it's like, no, understand the bad habit. Recognize that it might not be your star player, but it might be a good one that gives you some bench minutes. Like maybe it comes off the bench as your 7th player. Like just saying, like don't necessarily get rid of it unless it's like something really horrific, obviously, but like don't need to go there. But once we understand it, let's start interviewing candidates. And my comment is like, what if all of them got the job?
Yeah.
And then you started to rotate them, and then you started to over time figure out which ones you liked the most.
Yeah, and you're not overly reliant on one thing. If one thing isn't available to you, you don't fall apart.
Bingo.
I love that.
You start to realize you're creating depth in your ability, and so there's levels to this.
Yeah.
But that's mine. So what about you? I'm going to throw it right back at you. When you think about all the tips, tricks, and habit hacks, what's the lesson?
I've got one that's new to me this year, but before I share that, I wanted to share my nighttime routine.
Oh, please do.
So I love what you said, which is like create ways to like unwind. And again, I don't have like one specific go-to, but I have a variety of ways to unwind because can't always rely on just one. So when the weather's nice, I like to go for a walk. Not so much lately here in Pittsburgh, but that's usually a good way for me to kind of start my wind down. Now it does get my heart rate up, and when I come home, I'm usually not like ready to fall asleep, but it just kind of provides like that deep line of demarcation in the day between work and life.
It's the start of the chapter.
And I have a lot of friends and family that live outside of Pittsburgh, so it's a good time for me to sometimes call and catch up with them. But my 2 big pieces for unwinding in the evening is connection and creation. So instead of like consuming, try to create something. So lately I've been painting,
I love that.
or I've been playing the piano and practicing the piano. So, or sometimes reading, which is consumption. But I just find that it's a good way for me to unwind that doesn't feel like I'm always proud of myself that I chose that at the end of the night.
Oh, that's huge.
So connection and creativity. And it's been a lot easier since I live with someone now. I was a solo bird for a little while, but now that my fiance and I live together, I used to like be talking to him on the phone in the evening, but now it's like I get to actually put my phone upstairs, plug it in on a totally different floor,
all about it.
And I get real in-person connection, which there's nothing like that. So the connection and creativity, I think, is huge for me. So that's my evening routine, how I like to unwind, which has been huge. I mean, I was a nighttime scroller just like a lot of people.
Yeah, you start to realize consumption wasn't putting you anywhere. What's interesting, and what I'll share with you, is this is sort of a cool observation where creativity is something that, for example, my entire day is creativity. And so like my creative juices are maxed when I clock out. So that's where for me, one of the struggles I always had was like my desire to do something creative at the end of the day, 0.
That's fair.
But it's also to say that I don't consume all day, right? Like my specific role as the owner of this company and the CEO of this ship, I'm not in consumption mode. I'm in meetings all day, coming up with ideas, hearing things, providing, pointing. I am creating the way my brain creates. And I'll also note that I'm not an exceedingly artistic person.
Me neither, for the record, guys. I'm not some Picasso over here.
But it is just worth noting for those listening that you may want to understand what your job is, because you may find, for example, your role right now is very client facing, which means you're consuming a lot.
And I need to be not consuming.
And that's my point.
I need
why do you crave
no one
creativity?
To be speaking. I need to be alone.
Exactly. And so think about it, for those of you listening, think about what your job is. Is your job creativity, or is your job consumption? Because if your job is consuming, you might want to do something creative. I will note that years ago when I was only patient facing, there's a reason why every night I worked on the OptiLife Academy, the Rate My Day mobile app, the Lifestyle 180. I had creative outlets every night because all day I was consuming the life stories of individuals and trying to help them. And so because you have a consumption dominating job, right now your creative outlets are going to show up in your evening. As you shift more and more to a marketing role and you can start to consume less and you start to create more, I wonder if that flips.
We'll have to see.
So we'll have to watch
that. Stay tuned.
But that's just another example of how habit troubleshooting is an important thing to understand. Because if I'm sitting with someone, I wouldn't necessarily have used these words, but this is a great example of how to use these words, are at your end of your workday, are you drained of your creativity, or are you drained of your ability to consume more information or consume more coming in?
Words.
Yeah. And so if you're drained of consumption, it's probably time to go do something creative, little hobby, tinker, paint, whatever it is. If at the end of your day, your creativity is maxed, you may need to just consume. And that's where for me, like I said, you can hear where like the things I consume are very positive and very recharging and very empowering, and they probably renew my creativity. They definitely do. I will say that openly. But it's interesting to see that I'm in a creative work role and I crave consumption at the end of the day. And you're in a consumption-based work role and you crave creativity at the end of the day. And I think we all need a balance of some. So just something for you to think about at home. What is your role at job, role and job drain you of?
Yeah.
And I know there's probably some parents that are like, effing both. And it's like, I get it. Maybe that's where we need to then go into the third, which would be the self-care.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the other piece of this. There's the creativity, there's the consumption, and then there's just like the general self-care. That's where that soak and shower kind of situation can come into play. Those aren't necessarily consumptions. Those are just like self-care. And sometimes that's the boundary we need to set.
Yeah. Good.
So I love it. Thank you for sharing that. That's actually a cool dichotomy too.
Yeah, I was just interested at like our evening routines are very different, but they serve similar purposes.
Yep. And that's the importance of the diversity of habits, and also the importance of understanding what your habits are supposed to do for you.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And that's where, for example, you being a creative, there may be negative ways that creativity would get expressed, where you could then install positive, just like there's negative ways consumption can be expressed and there are positives. And so we can, no matter what, we can understand it. And that's another example of how you can better understand the job description and then start to interview better candidates and start to loop more and more of them in.
Totally. All right, are you ready for my big realization in terms of habit
hack? Blow my mind.
Okay, so for most of my life, when I was thinking about building good habits, I was always thinking about environment design, is what I call it. So creating really well fleshed out systems for success. So I'm being like very vague here, but what that could look like is, if you're trying to make time for exercising, like literally have it be on your calendar, like know when and where and how it's going to happen. That's like a system. Another system I have in place is like I have an app that locks me out of social media after 8 p.m. So boom, that like bad habit of scrolling in the evening is gone, and it's all dependent on my systems.
Yeah.
And I've got a bazillion systems that have really helped me like optimize my life for, the kind of life and habits that I want to have. What I realized I was falling short. This was like a very recent realization this year. And I give a shout out to Tony Robbins, because I went to a Tony Robbins event this year. And this is where I kind of had this realization, is that I was allowing my systems to be a crutch. And what I mean by that was like, if something in my system fell apart, I missed my workout that morning, I was miserable later. I like let it wreck my day. Or let's say I got a bad night of sleep, I would let myself believe because I didn't get that 8 hours of sleep that was part of my beautiful system that I wasn't going to have a productive work day.
Gotcha.
And so I just realized that although these systems and this environment design of like creating an environment around yourself in terms of your schedule and also in terms of just like with your household, your relationships, I still think that's really, really important. Don't make these habits you're trying to develop harder than they have to be, but also realize that you don't have to be a slave to them and that you don't have to allow them to be a crutch for you. So this was a big realization, because like waking up at 5 a.m. was something I was like working on for a lot of this year. And now it feels pretty easy. But for a while, I had this idea that's like, if I went to bed a little bit too late, then I would have to push my wake up time. So it was like, when you're not waking up at 5 a.m. consistently, it's hard to wake up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
But if you go to bed at like 9:30 or 10 instead of your normal 8:30 or 9, you can still wake up at 5 a.m. and you can still have a productive day.
Yeah.
And the good news is that you're going to get tired earlier.
And it might be a good way to reset it.
And 2 or 3 nights of waking up, or 2 or 3 mornings, I should say, waking up at 5 a.m., it's actually pretty easy. Like you might wake up naturally at that time, even if you didn't get a full 8 hours.
Yeah.
So that was just like one realization for me, is like, yes, your habits, your systems, your environment design, it's all very important, but also don't let it be a crutch. Because like, let's say you go out of your environment. Let's say you're staying with your in-laws over the holidays, and part of your system is that you don't keep sweets in the house. And then all of a sudden there's sweets all around you. Now what are you going to do? Right? So don't let your systems be a crutch.
Yeah.
That's my big takeaway.
I love that. I've always referred to that as the level of your habit. And I think that people zoom in too much on their habit. And so an example would be, there's a big difference between having an exercise habit and having a gym routine. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because if you have a gym routine and you can't make it to the gym, you're not going to exercise.
Yeah.
But if you have an exercise routine and you just so happen to use the gym as the exercise routine most often, but you can't make it to the gym, you're going to go for a run.
Yeah.
And so like that's that zoom in of a gym routine, but the gym then becomes the unnecessary focus of that routine. Mm-hmm. And so I love the idea of let's zoom out your habit. And with food, it's kind of the same idea, right? Where you can definitely, that's why dietitians are resistant about meal plans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's an unnecessary level of detail, right? Yeah. It's a useful reference to learn with. And I think there can be value in, hey, here's an example of how you could eat that would feel really good. But the problem is people then try and do that over and over and over and over again. That's not sustainable. But then also that meal plan is never going to represent 365 days. And if you think your meal plan is how you're supposed to eat, anything that isn't that meal plan is now failure.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what dietitians try and do is we try and show you that as an anchor of, yeah, if you can eat 3 or 4 times a day and include protein and produce and all those things, you can start to hear there where it's like, I try and include protein and produce at all of my meals. Mm-hmm. Well, now all of a sudden, when you go to a wedding, what's your plate going to look like? You're going to double up on the salad. You're going to grab an extra chicken breast, and you're going to still enjoy some cookies, but you doubled up on your protein and produce. Mm-hmm. And so that's another example of there's a level of detail to a meal plan or to a quote unquote gym routine that can derail you, which means you will feel inconsistent during times that are understandably inconsistent.
Yeah.
And I've always used that idea of 300 to 365. We're looking for what you do 300 days a year. Mm-hmm. There's going to be 65 that it just doesn't happen for a million different reasons. Yeah. Vacations, illnesses, all the different things, holidays. And if we can think about that, it's like, what habits are going to support that level of consistency?
Yeah.
And so like you said, your framework can be the thing that if it's too rigid, will break given the variability of life.
Yep. And also it's just like a belief in yourself that like you can do it even when the circumstances aren't perfect.
Exactly.
Like when you go out to eat, like you still can make a reasonable choice. Mm-hmm. Like I said, when you're sick, you can maybe still get some light form of movement that helps you feel better a little bit sooner.
Exactly.
So just like the belief in yourself that you're more resilient, that you realize, and you can still stick with things even when the conditions are suboptimal, even if it has to be a smaller version of whatever it is you're doing. And it's this thing I preach all the time, but I realized I got so entrenched in my beautiful, perfect systems that when my systems were off, I was really thrown.
They derail you. Yeah. And there's a phrase, right? Consistency over perfection. And this is why. Consistency means there's effort no matter what. Perfection means there's the perfect circumstances no matter what.
Yeah.
Well, the perfect circumstances don't exist. So you're not going to follow that meal plan to a T and that workout routine to a T permanently unless you live in a lab. Things are going to happen at some point, and you have to not be so worked up and self-flagellating when that happens that it creates some sense of loss or shame or failure in you. And so it's recognizing that consistency is showing up. I had a client, this was years ago. It was one of my favorite comments, and I think it just captures this so perfectly. He goes, we're checking in on after the first visit, and he goes, I really feel like things are going pretty well overall. Like the meal plan it's a good reference. I'm hitting it probably 70, 80% of the time. He's like, but even when I'm not, like, I feel like I'm paying attention and I'm just more aware. He's like, for example, like if I'm at work and they're having pizza, I'm picking the cheese over the pepperoni. And like, that was like such a cute, like, it made me smile, but it honestly, that was like, really wise. It was a very wise statement for visit number 2, because that's an example of someone that we had built a baseline plan that I had told him, this is your base. And then we want to just become increasingly aware of exceptions. And that's where when I use a meal plan as a dietitian, I don't say follow this every day or you're a piece of shit, right? I say, hey, here's a reference of how you may feel awesome. And this, given what you've told me about your day-to-day life, these are times that could anchor, that could feel really good. I want you to aim for this. And then I want you to keep track of when it doesn't happen over the next 2 to 4 weeks. And then when you and I sit down, we're going to talk through how this felt on the days that it worked. And we're going to talk about the exceptions. And then we're going to learn to navigate those. Because it's rare that one meal plan fits everybody's life all the time. Even I eat different amounts of meals on the weekends than I do during the week. But it's because I have a weekday routine and a weekend routine. And none of them have a gun to my head that are like set, fast, and hard. There's room for wiggle, you know? But that's that piece where like, it was so cool to hear someone that's like, hey, you gave me this meal plan and I'm hitting it like most, 7 out of 10 days, which is great. And then even when I'm not telling myself I'm failing. I'm embracing the fact that there are exceptions and different circumstances that this template that we built one time may not quite be ready for. And I'm doing my best to navigate those to the best of my ability and make efforts rooted in my goal. And that is it. That's the example of consistency of effort. And what's cool is him and I's work together then is to troubleshoot those 3 days, not to make them look like the other 7, but to improve his confidence in navigating those 3. Because health and wellness isn't living the 10 out of 10 days. It's navigating the 3 out of 10 more confidently and expertly. And so that's what's so neat about that framework you just talked about, where it's like we can install guidelines, but if we're not careful, they can take root and actually sabotage you instead of giving some sway to your habits, leaving room for systems to support you better. And I find that usually means that someone needs to zoom out of their habit, like one level, go from gym routine to exercise routine to increase consistency of exercising, go from meal plan to like meal pairings. To zoom out and create consistency of protein and produce presence. These are examples of just one level of operation higher that radically changes the game for you.
Totally. I even had like, one of those situations where like you set a healthy habit and then it's like, it turns out it's like no longer serving you. And like, I think our good friend Lane said today, if a habit you create is creating anxiety, it's no longer a healthy pursuit. And I marathon runner, taking a season off because I have a little injury, but I can still walk. So I was like, great, I'll walk and I'll shoot for 10,000 steps a day. Well, then it became a competition. So days that I didn't get 10,000 steps, it pissed me off. It pissed me off, and I was like rude to the people I love over this 10,000 steps goal. It was so stupid. Just because I was like in a crappy mood about it, and I was like, okay, we need to zone out. It's not about the 10,000 steps. It's about the effort of movement.
Exactly. You start to, again, that we can get so obsessed with the metric that we forget what the metric's meant to mean. And the 10,000 steps one is one of my favorites, because even the original research on 10,000 steps is vastly misunderstood, right? And that's just for those listening. The 10,000 steps that's on all of your Fitbits and your watches is rooted in a study that they basically had people do like a lifestyle report. And then they converted their reported activities of daily life to estimations of miles, and then converted the average number of steps in a mile to steps. And what they figured out was people that moved approximately 5 miles a day had lower risk of heart attack, lower risk of stroke, reported higher quality of life, were happier, all the metrics. It was
correlational data.
Correlational data. Well, is it because their watch dinged and said 10,000? Or is it because the people that they studied had higher income, which gave them more free time for leisure and recreation? Were they more likely to have recreationally active hobbies like playing sports? Were they more likely to have a dog, which is true, but they were more likely to have a dog because they had to walk said dog. And so it's funny because you start to go like, is movement healthy? Absolutely. I'm not trying to be this, advocate for sedentary behavior, but it's to say the 10,000 step number is like completely genuinely arbitrary. Meaningless. It's not even the amount of steps that those people had. It was an estimate, a retrospective estimate of what we think they were doing. But it goes back to like, if you have money, you work less hours, you walk your dog, and your hobbies are hiking, and
you probably also have a healthier diet because you're physically active.
You start to go like, yeah, of course those people are happier. Are they happier because they got 10,000 steps? Or are they happier because their life included exciting things that steps were a side effect, right? What was the actual cause there? And that's where the step count is symbolic of an active life. And yes, the activity is good, but the comment being the person that gets 10,000 steps, and here's where I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. Now let's compare two people. Let's take that correlational data and let's understand of it how much of it's the exercise. So now we have 3 people. Actually, we'd have to have 4 people. We're going to have someone who has very, very like passionate, enjoyed hobbies that get them naturally 10,000 steps a day. We're going to have somebody that walks circles around their living room to get 10,000 steps a day. We're going to have someone who has really passionate, exciting hobbies that are sedentary. And then we're going to have somebody that's completely sedentary with no hobbies. So those 4 people, okay, what are the outcomes? And we obviously don't know for sure, but based on the data that we have from all the research around this, the person that has the active lifestyle would have the longest lifespan and the lowest risk of illnesses and diseases. Second place wouldn't be the walk circles around the living room. It'd be the happy, passionate hobby person that's less active, because all of the things in their life are meaningful, and like purpose and value and like those things are so much more correlated to longevity than anything else. Then you'd likely have the circles around the living room, and then you'd have the sedentary, isolated, passionless, purposeless person, which that sounds like a spiral to depression. So like highly don't recommend. But let's just recognize there that like activity is a part of it. But there's a lot more info. And so for me, like I like to lift weights. Now, do I always want to? No. I like to though. And so like that's my hobby. I want people to find movement that they like, and then acknowledge that if you're going to do it 3 to 5 days a week, you're not going to want to every day. And sometimes you got to be a big boy and tell yourself it's too bad. And sometimes you have to listen to yourself and take the rest. But it's to say that for the most part, find something you like to do as a hobby, and then like do that hobby with some regularity.
And don't let it become stressful. Like I genuinely love to run. I love to be active. I love to walk. But I was allowing it to become a source of stress. And that was just
putting too much pressure on it.
And
so it is. There's a balance to it. But it is just a note that things like the 10,000 step rule, it's hilarious when you have this like arbitrary number that you become like overly invested in. And then what's crazy is like it's supposed to reflect something healthy. And to your point, it's like mentally preoccupying, which isn't healthy. But then when we actually like think about it, it's actually a numeric way of saying you should be living a connected and passionate life with a lot of variety.
Like,
and also get a dog.
Listen, I want a dog. But to be fair, I got like 11,000 steps the other day, and I was like, what did I even do? And like, I think I went for like a short run in the morning, and then I went tubing with my fiance. So we were just like walking, running around in the snow, and just naturally was more active. And so that was like a good example of like the version of Devon that has hobbies and also is fairly active, but not always, you know. But
and that's what's needed when you start to think about activity integrated into things. The activity is important, but it's likely bundled with something equally and potentially more important. And so when we think about your tubing scenario, like, was it being outside? Was it being away from all of the things that are pressuring you? Was it the connection you were having being playful with your fiance? Or was it the walking up the hill winded? It's like,
I was not tracking my steps walking up the hill. That's for sure.
And it's to say that like walking up the hill winded, like sure, it definitely like pushed your body, which creates some level of endorphin production and some level of dopamine, like all that. But like the oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine rush you were getting from the human connection, from like the connection, the presence, you start to realize like that's the difference between walking around circles in your living room versus going for a walk with a friend or taking a class or participating in some sort of outdoor adventure. That's no different than when I go walk with Apollo. Like when I'm lost in the woods with Apollo, is it that I'm walking that's healthy? I mean, sure, it's part of it, but like me being off my phone, away from everything, not like focusing on 6 months from now or 3 months from now or the next project or the next thing, and being present and like watching him be present, which he's a good role model for me on presence, right? Like start to realize like there's a lot of things in that thing that are healthy for me. And again, the version where I'm putting on Oculus goggles and doing it virtually, probably not as advantageous, but it is to say that like there's still value in the experience. And that's the piece that the 10,000 steps doesn't capture. And so I challenge anybody with a step count to not just raise your step count, which, to be fair, like walking a little more to go to the restroom and fill up your water bottle and parking farther away, all very good things. So like not discouraging those, but once as you raise your step count, also look for like how many things are you getting steps from that are actually like bundled, like they mean more than just steps. You're not just doing them just for the steps. You're doing them for the social benefit, or you're doing them for the mental benefit. You're listening to music, you're doing other things that are like also positive for you.
Filling your cup.
Yep,
that's awesome.
It's good stuff. Those are some good habit hacks. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and I think what we should do is we should put this in the show notes, is I want to talk about 75 hard now that we've just talked about these two things.
Okay.
So now that we've talked about all this, the rigidity of habits being a problem over time, not understanding what the habits that you're trying to replace were doing for you, I think it's important to acknowledge why 75 hard fails so many people. And when I say fails so many people, what I mean is one of two things happens to most people that do it. They either A, can't finish it because they're so physically beat up by it, or they finish it, but they're crawling across the finish line and as a result have done nothing. The whole point of 75 hard was challenge yourself and prioritize these things above everything else, and then they'll become habit, so then you can keep doing them. The problem is they will only become habit if they actually fit into your life. And 75 hard is a template of habits that are someone else's, which means the chances that they fit in your life pretty low. And then they're also extreme to try and create extreme results, which means the chances that you're ready for that level is also low. And so you're either not going to finish because it's actually physically like you're getting injured, or you're going to finish crawling across the finish line because it was just too much, which means you're more likely to need a rest from those habits afterwards. So when I say it fails people, I don't mean that they don't get some crazy benefit aesthetically during it. What I mean is on day 76, it's rare that they're like truly sticking with it.
Yeah, and hyped to continue.
And hyped to continue building.
Maybe.
And it's because it's the 2 workouts a day. It's like, it's very rigid and it's also very excessive. And so one of the things I like to point out is you're forcing habits that you haven't like got rooted in the replacement. You're just hard stop, hard start. That doesn't always land well. Most of the time it doesn't. And then they're rigid, non-negotiable, which, yes, sometimes forcing it creates consistency, but forcing it creates consistency if forcing it creates the ability to troubleshoot and integrate so that consistency can come. Most people do 75 hard by ignoring their other things. And taking 2 months to ignore your life, that's Biggest Loser syndrome. That's the people that went up to wherever the Biggest Loser camp was to spend 3 to 6 months working out and eating specifically, and then getting sent back home to face their favorite pizza place, their mom's favorite dessert, all of their vices, their job, their stresses, all the things that led them to where they were in the first place that they just ignored for 6 months. They're now going back to that and have learned nothing. 75 hard is very much that. Like, it's not integrating well.
Yeah. I'll say that I appreciate what they're trying to do.
Same. Because, and I hope that's clear from what we've just said.
Yeah, like I appreciate that it's like the intention is like do it even when it's a challenge and you have to go out of your way.
Correct.
But like
sometimes
all the things
to
you
make
just said,
space, you have to force space.
Right.
Totally get it. But to your point, there's an art to that if it's going to be sticky, if it's going to stick around. And when you have people that don't exercise doing 2-a-days every day for 75 days, they're probably not exercising for a week after that. Just like realistically. And that's not because they're lacking willpower. That's because physiologically that's idiotic.
So what are we going to do instead?
Yeah. And so one of my favorite creative tinkerings that I've ever come up with, and it's funny because we kind of like resuscitated this thing over a couple months ago and went, oh, right, this tool. We built, and we did a podcast on it a long time ago, the Lifestyle 180. And it's a very similar concept with some personalizations to it. And so it's a very simple document. We have a spreadsheet version and we have a PDF version. We're happy to link in show notes, and then also you can DM us and we'll send it to you via email if you'd like. But it's a simple concept. It's a worksheet and it has 6 rows for 6 habits. And then there's a habit data bank below. And it's, protein and produce with every meal, number of meals a day, time range or when you want to have dinner by, minutes of exercise, steps, pages in a book,
whatever is meaningful to you.
Correct.
You get to fill it in. We're not choosing
Pick
what
your
your
6
habits should be.
Yeah, these are meant to be things that you do each day that will help you feel like the best you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 30 columns. And 6 habits times 30 columns is 180 opportunities in a month to push yourself forward in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I encourage people to do is month 1, pick 2, do those. Month 2, pick 2 more, do all of them. Month 3, pick 2 more and do all of them. So you have a 90-day work up to the 6, and then you established your baseline of, okay, I got 120 out of 180. And so then we need to troubleshoot the 60. Why didn't they happen? What are the air barriers and obstacles? And then we want to work on consistency, not perfection, not expecting 180. And if I don't get 180, I'm a POS, right? But hey, here's 180 opportunities to support myself in a positive way. How many of them can I get given the chaos that is life? More is better. And if you got 0 today, guess what? Let's get 1 tomorrow, right? And so there's a flexibility to it that speaks to what you were talking about. There's a framework with it, like you've talked about, but it's zoomed out to the appropriate vantage point. It's personalizable enough that the habits you're installing could be simple things, and you can then scale them, right? One might be drinking 32 ounces of water because you're a soda and coffee drinker. And then once you get it 30 out of 30 days, you have drink 64 ounces of water. Like you can scale them, right? You can scale the food ones, you can scale the move ones, you can customize them and evolve them in ways, you can shift them. So there's some adaptability to them, but more importantly, it's meant to do what a lot of these challenges are meant to do, which is create awareness of things that have a positive effect, and then challenge your awareness of them and push you to be consistent with them. But where this one improves is the personalization of what you're doing, so that they actually are things that are applicable to you and integratable into your life. And then not the expectation of perfection, but the expectation of trying to go do better. The learning curve that is getting better at this. You've lived your life till now as the less healthy you. You're not just going to snap your fingers and in 75 days be the healthier you. Hi, Apollo.
Hi, we're awake.
So those are the things that can do. And it's just like subtle nudges that make a cool concept very, very accessible. And so I challenge everyone listening to the Lifestyle 180. Oh, excuse you, sir.
I love that, because the Lifestyle 180, it really focuses you in on the lead measures instead of the lag measures. The lead measures meaning like the habits and behaviors that get you to the outcomes that you're shooting for, which is the lag measures. So the lead measures come first. So focus on those.
Focusing on inputs and then let the outcomes come.
It gives you an honest assessment of how you're actually doing, and then it also gives you some room for growth. So I love the Lifestyle 180.
That's fantastic. And so, like I said, message us in show notes if you need it. We're happy to send it along. And I'm actually working on seeing if we can get some sort of more like permanent virtual version of it. So hopefully stay tuned on that as a side project of side projects, but it's something that we're working on.
TBD. Awesome. Okay. Well, so hello.
Oh, Apollo. You can tell that's his little cough. Getting over his kennel cough. Oh, bud.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Let's talk what's to come in 2025.
Woo!
It's going to be different.
We've got ourselves 2025. And so, I mean, if we zoom out first and go, case specific wide, this past year we opened an Erie location. We added quite a few new RDs to the team, and we've definitely built and started scaling new services like the ViTrack testing. We built our CSN proactive lab panel that tests hormones and all sorts of other markers of inflammation and metabolic health. And so we did a lot of those things. We're going to be building on some of those with some additional personalizations. And we're also in March going to be adding a Florida location. And so,
Florida.
Florida.
So excited.
We're in North Carolina now. We're going to be in Florida, and then we're continuing to gradually expand around Pennsylvania. We've also really upped our game on the virtual front. And so I don't know that a lot of people know that, but we have our 9, soon to be 10 locations. We are 50% virtual. And so, we have licensure in a variety of states. We have the ability to see patients, not just in the 3 states we're in. And so, there's definitely opportunity to work with us and see us. We can check, what licensure laws are where you live. We're always, paying attention to that. and we're always looking to support people. So I think we have that continued expansion from a case-specific perspective.
Big things coming.
But then within the podcast, we're really up to no good because we have a marketing team that decided that I'm old news and need kicked to the curb.
We've colluded. There's been a collusion.
I feel like I'm being overthrown. Well, I will let you announce the cool idea.
Okay, so we had an intervention. We love CSN3M, mindsets, mentoring, myth busting. However, we feel as if CSN3M is a bit of a mouthful. Not all of us are as articulate as you are. So we've decided to change our name. We are rebranding.
We are rebranding the podcast.
And it's going to be Nutritionally Speaking. Nutritionally Speaking.
I do really like it. I think that's an awesome name. I'm very excited about it.
Starting season 5, we are not starting over at season 1 because we have earned our first 4 seasons.
Yes.
But season 5, we are going to be rebranded and named Nutritionally Speaking.
Case Specific Nutrition presents Nutritionally Speaking.
With Devon and Andrew, or Andrew and Devon, however you want to have it.
I'll fight you on that later. We'll do that off camera. But it's to say that I'm really excited about the rebrand. Yeah. And with that comes a whole bunch of things. We want to spruce up our space.
Yes.
We're going to be working on our mics.
We've been recording this on Andrew's iPhone for quite some time, so we might be upgrading that.
Yeah, we want to kind of up the ante a little bit because listeners and viewers have been so committed to us and we've watched it grow and we really enjoy doing this. And so it's to note that this episode is going to air in January and this is the last episode of season 4 and it's also quote unquote the last episode of CSN3M. Season 5, episode 1 of Nutritionally Speaking. We're targeting April.
Yep.
And we need a couple months to get all of our ducks in a row, get our recording scheduled,
off to get ourselves together,
and build our things. But we will plan to see you back here in a few months. It'll go quickly. The first quarter always does, with some new swag, and we'll be coming at a lot of the topics we kind of alluded to in our Ask Andrew Anything Part 3. Definitely listen to that episode. It came out in December. We're going to probably be doubling back on some of those. I think we're going to talk about some of the stuff we just dug into today, especially as this new administration comes in and there's progress in the world of the FDA, the USDA, the MAHA movement, all the things that are happening. We're definitely going to need to be vocal about a lot of those things so that we can make sure people are understanding the spectrum that we're discussing. So I think we've got a lot of awesome topics to dig into. And so we're going to be attacking all of them, nutritionally speaking.
Looking better and hotter than ever.
Ooh, there you go.
New rebrand.
I appreciate that.
But I'm excited. And if there's anything that you want to hear about, if there's any questions that you have, any topics that you want us to dive into, shoot us a DM, shoot us an email, let us know. We will cover it. And that's a wrap. CSN3M.
We're closing it out. Happy New Year to everybody. And until next time, be well.
Be well.